Could the best be yet to come for Keke Coutee? That and more this week on the couch. On the couch this week, Scott Barrett, fellow Keke Coutee lover. Spread the love.
Yeah, so Keke Coutee, one of my favorite prospects coming out of last year's draft by breakout grade, depth adjusted yards per target, passer rating when targeted, missed tackles forced per catch, yards after the catch per reception, really every metric I find meaningful. He was anywhere between great to borderline elite, depth adjusted yards per target, breakout grades elite. He didn't have the draft capital behind him, though I thought he should have went higher in the draft. But then, lo and behold, his NFL debut, he catches 11 passes, the second most by any player all time. And then last year, we know he was hampered by multiple injuries. Right. He didn't go more than 2 weeks without missing a game or winding up on the injury report. But including the postseason, if you only look at his 5 full games in which he played at least 45% of the team snaps, he averaged 9.4 targets per game, most on the team ahead of DeAndre Hopkins, and 17.2 fantasy points per game. Those are high-end wide receiver 2 numbers. He's getting drafted like a low-end wide receiver 5. And ridiculously is even cheaper in dynasty leagues than redraft leagues, even though he's, months younger than Andy Isabella, JJ Arcega-Whiteside. So screaming value to me.
It's going to be fun to see what he does. And I love that you pointed out that he was hurt. So what's great is and Scott does great work. Scott Barrett, 2 R's, 2 T's, DFB, Dude Fantasy Bro. You'll always be Dude Fantasy Bro to me. And at PFF, and you're seeing things through a lens of data, but it's because we're looking at the same thing, we're describing the same thing in different ways, adding that part of the story. If he was ticking all of these top-end metrics last year to measure efficiency or productivity, and we know he was playing hurt, well, then what does 2019 bring? And the other thing is, again, Narrative Street, but listen, things that are happening now that we're hearing about are going to be important. We don't know which ones, probably not many, but some. Or it's that golden thread of truth that is going to lead us to the profitable picks. And Keke Coutee is creating that off-season buzz. Of course, we know he has the chemistry with Deshaun Watson. That's a real thing. And if he can open it up, because his hamstrings were never right last year, then we're going to see a really spectacular player. So, we could just start with Todd Gurley, Scott, now that we got our love fest out of the way. But really, I want to just open the floor a little more. And we're meeting in them streets, like Evan Silva would say, in different mock drafts, lots of mock drafts going on. I remember asking Evan about a pick when he was on here last week, Scott. He's like, oh, man, I'm in 5 different mocks right now. I think I'm in 2. I was in 2 with Evan as we speak. I don't know how many we're in together, but it's the first chance to really lay your cards out and look at everyone else's cards. And you start to see things that show you, okay, these are going to be some of the centerpieces of my strategy this year, or players that are going to be important to me and that I'm going to have on a lot of my teams or almost none of my teams. You learn pretty quickly. So give me something, Scott, that has emerged pretty quickly, maybe something you didn't see coming as we're starting to do all of these industry expert, making air quotes, mocks.
Yeah, so speaking of an expert mock, we were in the MFL 10 of Death together, and I really loved your first few picks, specifically Travis Kelce, which I think most people thought was a reach at 107. But I was saying if I had any pick after the 105, I would take Travis Kelce. I like the advantage he gives you to your best ball teams. You don't have to, he's a lock for about at least 10 fantasy points per game, anywhere up to 30. But because you have him, you don't have to draft a second tight end. But then even outside of best ball leagues where that sort of roster construction is more meaningful, I have Travis Kelce not only as a first round pick, but before any wide receiver.
Well, and that's the thing. Okay. So, and I know I went down with the ship, and a lot of you went down the ship with me with first round Gronk last year. And what I just didn't see coming and what I was blind to was his body was breaking down. Even though there were moments, even early last year, week 1, but certainly in 2017, where he looked kind of like Gronk of old, that faded from the the stage very quickly. But Travis Kelce is still very much in his prime. And this Tyreek Hill situation, and we can talk a little more about ripple effect of that. But we know Patrick Mahomes is good and may even get better. I think he's as likely to get better this year as he is to have some backslide because the league figures him out, even without Tyreek Hill. But Kelce's his guy. I mean, the chemistry, and Hill was his guy deep, but the chemistry between Mahomes and Kelce it's just natural. And Mahomes and his creativity with his arm slots and releases and the way that he can throw the ball on the move, he gives Kelce the chance to make plays, and Kelce makes those plays. And Kelce could shatter records for a tight end this year because he will be the primary guy out there when Hill isn't, and maybe even when Hill is. And I went down with the first round Gronk ship, but I'm on the first round Kelce ship. Is there anything here, Scott, to the idea of I should get JJ Zacharyson on next week to talk about the first round tight end. But I know first round tight end hasn't been something that everybody can get behind. Do you see something to that? Is Kelce just that special? Do you have any reservations about first round tight end?
So the typical reservations with first round tight end has been, well, Gronk on a fantasy point per game is well worth a first round pick. The problem is he carries all this hidden injury risk. And, right. Like you said, his body broke down last year. I don't see Kelce carrying that risk. But what I do see is a massive advantage to your fantasy teams in terms of, value-based drafting, positional disparity. So Kelce last year was 40 points away from finishing as the wide receiver 1 in PPR leagues. No Tyreek this year. Like you said, I think Mahomes has just as good a chance of taking a step forward, maybe not in terms of fantasy points, but in terms of actual quality of play. So I could see Kelce making up those missing 40 points with Tyreek no longer in the picture. But then you also have to factor in that outside of the top 3, maybe top 5 tight ends, it's a wasteland. It's gross out there. So last season, Kelce outscored the number 6 highest scoring tight end by 8.2 fantasy points per game, the same difference between the wide receiver 1 and the wide receiver 22. And then between Kelce and the number 12 tight end, it was the same difference as between the wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 32. So really that advantage is just massive to your fantasy teams. When you're dropping, 10.3 fantasy points per game, just at this one position, I really have to,
sweep the leg. Well, no, because Scott, I'd like to say your goal is to make a team so good that it's not fun for everybody else in your league to play fantasy football. And Kelce is the first step to doing that, because you create such an advantage at tight end that cannot be made up. And I think that Ertz and Kittle are probably due for a step back from their 2018 levels, just to add to this. And in the chat room, Rob Nordblad says, heck, they go on due dates together year round. There's something special there. And unless he's talking about me and you, Scott, but we haven't been on a due date yet. Now that you're down in Houston, though, or going to be down in Houston, we'll be closer. We'll be in the vicinity. So I'd love, going for the jugular. You start off your draft with Kelce, and then if you hit on later running back and wide receiver picks, then you really have a team that's difficult to overcome. Now, Elliott, McCaffrey, Kamara, and Barkley, although Giants quarterback play is going to be ugly this year. That's why Barkley's 4th out of those 4 for me. And then that's when you start to think about Kelce if you have the number 5 slot. But I get irrational exuberance, Scott, at this time of year about different offenses, different players at intersections of forces like weather. I can't help but think about the weather in New Orleans. You're going to be thinking about the weather living in Houston, about, when the jet stream comes together with the heat, what comes together with the moisture, it creates, a superstorm, the fantasy perfect storm. And there might be a storm forming. I'm thinking Kelce number 5, but I might be thinking David Johnson. And the more we hear about Arizona, if it's positive, the more I like that. Maybe would even take him ahead of Barkley if I get carried away. Are you getting carried away by a David Johnson rebound this year?
Yeah, so I absolutely am. You have to remember that, in 2016, he scored the 9th most fantasy points by any running back all time, the most of any active running back. So that's, above Todd Gurley numbers. above Le'Veon Bell numbers. Last year, still finished as an RB1, but in spite of literally everything going wrong, what went wrong? They ranked, dead last in game script adjusted pace of play, and near last over the past decade. Guess what? You have Cliff Kingsbury now, who runs at a hyper fast pace, top 5 among all Division I teams last year. What also went wrong? A decline in target volume, a lack of wide receiver routes. Remember, in 2016, he was running a lot of routes as a wide receiver with an atypically high average depth of target. Texas Tech last year, one of only, I think it's 8 teams to have 75 or more targets go to running backs last year. And Kingsbury all offseason has said, we want David Johnson running wide receiver routes. We want to target him to the deep and intermediate levels of the field. And also, this was not only just the worst offense in the league last year by literally every measure, yards per game, first downs per game, red zone drives per game, but it's one of the worst of the past 5 seasons, past 10 seasons. So I think all of that's going to go up. And I have him as my number 5 running back number 5 overall player in current drafts.
Yeah, and that's ahead of, and of course in PPR leagues you're going to think about DeAndre Hopkins or whoever your favorite receiver is, Devontae Adams. I think that's a good optimistic play, and it's a bet on. And Scott, we also hear. Well, let me ask you just as a quick aside before I go back to where I was going, Scott. How much do you pay attention to what we're hearing out of mini camps, what we're hearing from beat writers, OTAs, et cetera, right now?
Yeah, I think that's massively important. I get people say, "Oh, he's like a data numbers guy," but no, I'm living on narrative street with you. I think all that stuff is important. You need to make sense logically, intuitively, and teams lie, coaches lie, but you can, with a little bit of effort, you can sort through those tea leaves and find out what's real and what's not. Like Christian McCaffrey last year, banging the drum on him. Mm-hmm. Ron Rivera, yeah, I bought into it, and it made us pretty profitable, those of us who invested in him.
Yeah, speaking of Ron Rivera, Panthers getting Gerald McCoy. Oh, thank you on behalf of the Steelers Nation to not have him land in the AFC North, but Charles McDonald, who's just a man, 4 verts, wrote a terrific piece on how you putting McCoy. Immediately, my thought was the same thing, like McCoy, Poe, and Short next to each other. And Charles wrote a terrific article today on how they can be optimally used. So another thing coming out, and part of how we can sort through the tea leaves, Scott, is the beat writers. Because they're their firsthand narratives, and they're also asking questions. And sometimes beat writers can tell us things without coming right out and telling us things these times a year. They have restrictions. There's certain things they can't directly tell us. Cecil always wrestles with this. Cecil will say, well, I can't say anything about this, but if I were to speculate, how they might use the player. Anyway, one of the things we're hearing is that out of Miami is that Ryan Fitzpatrick is decisively better than Josh Rosen. Like, there is no competition, which again leads into the idea that not just Steve Wilkes and the Gilligan's Island, except getting shipwrecked, they just run ashore and stay ashore all year. And David Johnson and this whole offense could bounce back. So on that note, Scott, is it crazy that Kyler Murray, and there was a good question put out there, I can't remember who put it out there, I'm sorry, that Kyler Murray is being ranked between 12th and 15th, but going between 6th and 8th, and when's this gap going to close itself? And I'm going to write some stuff on how ADP caps are going to close themselves soon. I actually had Kyler Murray number 5. I don't even think that's too optimistic, honestly. He could be quarterback 1 this year. That's in his range of outcomes. So if I'm going to take a quarterback early, I need that. That's what the commodity I'm taking. There's any number of wide receivers, Scott, we could throw darts at here. Do you have other players that you share optimism, maybe you're higher on than the pack in this Cardinals offense?
Yeah, so I'm definitely with you there on Kyler Murray. I had an interesting article out on Konami code quarterbacks to target,
Reeves.
There you go. Yeah. Hat tip to Reeves, just kind of updating that for Reeves, because I don't think that's ever been more relevant than it was this year and last year. Just all time or all decade highs in rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, rushing attempts. Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, the first quarterbacks since at least 2000 to score over 50% of their fantasy points on the ground rather than as a passer. Jackson with the PFF record in fantasy points per dropback. These guys are legitimate potential league winners. I said, in terms of the Konami code, Lamar Jackson might be the one, like Neo, the Matrix, the one, just because of how prolific he was as a runner. But at the same token, maybe that's Kyler Murray, because like Russell Wilson, like amazing passer, better runner, and he's going to have volume for days, whereas Wilson doesn't.
Right, it's the opposite. It's like, imagine if somebody just unleashed Russell Wilson and put it in him in an optimal spot where everything in the offense hinged on him.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's going to be exciting. There's so many exciting things to think about coming up this year. Maybe not as exciting. And I guess I'm going to address this, and we're going to talk this topic to death in the offseason, but it's an important topic. And the reality is, as fantasy analysts, made up thing that we do, that we're going to make decisive recommendations on incomplete information, Scott. That's what we do. I mean, when people say the reservations, well, we don't know enough. Well, we have to go forward with we don't know enough. That's what we're constantly doing. And of course, I'm talking about the Rams running back. Zare Kansabedian. I'm sorry if I it's a great name. This girly thing is getting blown way out of control. I've seen other people say Jacob Moses, a longtime friend of the show, Daryl Henderson ADP is getting out of control. What is your recommendation, or what you find yourself doing in drafts? And I want to make sure to differentiate, Scott, between those two things, because this is one where that intuition, gut feeling is going to be it's going to be the material difference maker in what you do. You can think it out, you can reason it out, but then when you're on the clock and you have Todd Gurley in one hand and you have, Mike Evans or Joe Mixon or Melvin Gordon or whoever, that's when you learn how this Gurley knee situation is really skewing your view of his value. And likewise for Henderson. And maybe even we could talk about Malcolm Brown here. But how much is this affecting you? If Gurley's going, say, in the 3rd round, Scott, and Henderson's going in the 6th round, what's your reaction to that?
Right. So right after the draft, I was hitting the smash buy button on Darrell Henderson, who I loved coming out. I think the fit is ideal, perfect. And I was avoiding Gurley like the plague. So 6 and 3, I think that's actually where it ends up. And I think that's probably good values for both of them. So just given Gurley who he is, how much money is invested to him. And I did talk, I don't have a Dr. Gene Bramwell like you guys, but I have a friend I respect, well-respected in the field, who says he's not too worried about Gurley. He thinks it's a little out of control. Sony Michel, that knee, worry about that knee. Gurley is not as much. He's not going to be a bell cow ever again. What we saw from him in the past few years, not going to happen again. It's going to be more of a committee. But what kind of committee is that going to look like? It's not going to be a 50-50, I don't think, unless Henderson really just blows the doors off, and he might. We saw Gurley put together amazing numbers, really good numbers, while having these wide open holes to run through. Henderson in college, every time he got a hole, half as big, took it to the house, game over. So really that might happen. PFF has said, honestly, like Gurley's a little overrated once you factor in those gaping holes he's given. Exactly. Though he is, a great pass catcher too. You have to factor that in. Henderson, hyper efficient as a pass catcher, but on very minimal work. Who is Henderson? League winning potential for sure. What's the most likely avenue to success? It's going to be, I think, like somewhere between a 60-40, 70-30 split in Gurley's favor. And guess what? If he's getting that in the Rams offense with those holes, he's probably going to return value at a round 3 price tag.
No, beautiful. And what you brought up early, Scott, I think is something that we have to pause and really highlight. Is and you brought it up later, the 2 points converge. Number one, 3rd and 6 is reasonable for both of these guys. Yes, it's reasonable for Henderson. I'll talk more about that. But the Ram situation is a tremendous situation. Gurley's overrated not because we are overstating his innate talents or his ability to apply them on the fields, but he's just in a tremendous, tremendous running back situation. One that can support 2 fantasy relevant, 2 every week starters, like the Saints, like the Patriots. And I love the tucking in the Sony Michel thing there, because Damian Harris is going to start going in the 9th or 10th round.
Good call.
Soon enough. I think in the MFL 10 of death, and that's not a mock draft. I'm not trying to correct you, Scott. I'm just saying it's the MFL 10 of death. Somewhere in the afterlife, like how we did the NFL 10 of death is going to determine our punishments or something. So Daryl Henderson in the 6th, Damian Harris in the 10th, Todd Gurley in the 3rd, Sony Michel. Well, maybe I won't necessarily touch Michel depending on the running backs going around him. Chances are I would want other running backs, but if you can corner the Rams backfield, and this is where, and Mike Tagliere, a good friend of the show, also, I went to my back and forth. He was saying, Gurley has to, something to the effect of like Henderson's ADP's out of control because Gurley would have to retire or break down. And this goes back to the backfield supporting 2 running backs that are relevant every week. But also the idea that you're cornering this production that is every week. Like for those of us that do weekly projections, every week you're going to have a Rams running back. Look what TJ Anderson did with the situation in your top 10 or 12, and probably a second one in your top 35 or 40. Because one thing we can say for certain is that Gurley is not going to dominate touches the way he did last year. That's out of the range of possibilities for him. And it also, as you point out, this is why you have to like Henderson. And Henderson league winning potential is really in lights here. Just like Larry Johnson, the year that Priest Holmes coming in without arthritis, that we knew about at the time, if there was. And Larry Johnson ended up being a league winner with even less of a crack in the door to get in probably than Henderson, because Henderson has the early usage because they're going to pace the usage of Gurley. If he's on in a program, if he's not participating in OTAs, they're going to pace his usage. And then at the end of the year, as the playoffs approach, as was pointed out, and I wish I could remember who pointed this out on Twitter, that later in the year, they're probably less likely to use Gurley heavily as they're resting him for the playoffs, basically. So Henderson has these massive doors to come through, and that's it. Even if Gurley's full speed, if he's not, that's where the league-winning potential comes in. We've already talked about Travis Kelce, but there's somebody else in Kansas City, Scott, that is another player, speaking of ADP correction. I mean, we're going to know more about Tyreek Hill, but based on the possibilities for Tyreek Hill, it seems like Mecole Hardman, he should be going in the 8th or 9th round. It seems like this is something that people have been a little slow to absorb in his range of possibilities this year. What do you think of his range of possibilities?
Yeah, so one of the things I do after every single NFL draft is I go back and I watch all the press conferences with the GMs and head coaches regarding the players they drafted. Like we said before, sometimes they're lying. You have to read the tea leaves, but this is a time in the draft where teams are actually very honest and forthcoming. They're excited. They just got this guy. They spent all this work. So, they're typically more honest than normal, but yeah. So what the GM Brett Veach said after the draft pick, he said, this is a guy that's going to come in and provide an immediate impact and see the field soon. They love his speed. They compared him to Tyreek, given his speed and his return ability. They said a lot of teams were trying to trade up right in front of that pick. And then as soon as they took Hardman, all those teams no longer wanted to trade up. But they said they're going to use, Andy Reid said they're going to use him like they did Tyreek early in his career, sort of gadget type, showcasing some rushing potential. And then maybe the next year he'll come along a little bit more in terms of route running, see more targets. So I think he's a great best ball pick in that range. I think he's a little riskier in redraft, but I mean, the potential number 3, number 4 receiver in the Chiefs offense with this guy's speed. And that's so important with Patrick Mahomes, arguably, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL right now, maybe the best. But the thing most impressive with Mahomes to me is no one can get the ball out quicker and throw it harder than Mahomes. So a guy with this speed is so important to that offense. So if Tyreek Hill's out of the picture, yes, I didn't love Hardman pre-draft too much, but after this landing spot, he became my number 2 wide receiver in rookie drafts.
Okay, so we have been very harmonious, Scott, on the show, but we should go back to a place from that MFL 10 of death where we can highlight a disagreement, and we can delve into and there's some other things here about, and it's interesting. And I think I want to give an intro to this topic by saying that it's almost like from the narrative street point of view, and I'm glad you're willing to come down narrative street. And the reality is there's intersecting narratives that will have some varying lesser or greater influence on the outcome of a player season. And I say that like it's not even on one path, because like within the season, the narrative of the offense will unlock its potential can then be sidetracked by the narrative of a player's injury potential or some other important part of the offense, or suspension could pop up. So even during the season, we're right, then we're wrong, then we're right, or one narrative takes over, then another one intersects with it and grabs control of the player's season. But we had a good discussion, and I like that a few people showed up to say they appreciated it, because it was just a good zesty conversation about what's going to happen with the Chicago backfield. And a lot of things are in play, but you made a strong investment early, and we got into the underpinnings of our takes on the Chicago backfield and the Chicago offense. And Scott, the Chicago offense, the Indy offense, the Philly offense, these offenses are a picture of where fantasy football is going to go, where teams are going to really stockpile these assets, and it's going to be more of a week-to-week thing, but we're also going to have to project how we expect these rational, creative, innovative offensive minds to deploy what they have. So let's start with the Bears backfield. How are you diagnosing it, at least in terms of fantasy values in early drafts?
So in the MFL 10 of death, I took David Montgomery, a player I loved pre-draft, and felt good about at the time. I took him too early, pretty much just based on everything I've read since from beat writers. So I'll outline my reasoning, and then we could have maybe a similar back and forth to what we had on Twitter. But so the Bears traded Jordan Howard for a 2020 6th-round pick. That's not a lot at all. And then they traded their top pick in the draft, their first pick in the draft, the number 87 pick, and a 2020 4th-round pick, and they dropped 43 spots on day 3 to move up, 9 picks to take David Montgomery. The team brought in 15 running backs for visits during the pre-draft process. That was the most of all teams. Tariq Cohen led all running backs in fumbles and fumble rate over the past 2 seasons. Howard led all running backs in drops since entering the league. Mike Davis, 0 money guaranteed after this year. I took a look at all this, the investments and the lack of investments elsewhere, the lack of draft capital they had going in the draft, and then what they spent to acquire David Montgomery. I said, it's clear they want a bell cow running back. Nagy in Kansas City preferred the bell cow running back. You saw in games he was calling the plays. Kareem Hunt's usage spiked immeasurably. So I thought he liked a bell cow running back. It wasn't the case last year, but I thought that hurt the offense. Tariq Cohen comes in, you're tipping your play calling hand. It's going to be a pass play. Jordan Howard comes in, it's going to be a run play. So to give him more diversity, I saw this David Montgomery pick. I said, okay, he's going to be a bell cow. He has all this draft capital behind him. And then you disagreed.
Right. And I think that some of the things you point out are compelling. And if David Montgomery is a big hit year one. We're going to look back at these things like the Kareem Hunt comparison. And I can't remember the exact coach, but there's actually like a 1 degree of separation idea that David Montgomery, and it's not just contact balance and yards after contact, and it's not just how Nagy used Kareem Hunt, but they're actually like he really might have been thinking of Kareem Hunt while he was watching him. And that bodes well. We can look at the investments that you outlined, and it pretty much matches Darrell Henderson investment. And if anything, it's more striking because the Bears had less draft capital. So they were using a bigger chunk of a smaller wallet. And so that makes sense. The Mike Davis investment is not much more than Malcolm Brown, who we didn't even mention. And Malcolm Brown, by the way, is a solid player. I think Mike Davis is better than Malcolm Brown. But and Malcolm Brown could matter in fantasy leagues, absolutely could matter in fantasy leagues this year. It should not be left out of that Rams running back conversation, especially if we're talking up the Rams running back situation. Quality, anybody, John Kelly, anyone, speaking of players with good contact balance. But Mike Davis is a player, first of all, that and what's funny is when we peel this stuff away, Scott, we end up back at the basic evaluations of players, because I'm just a little lukewarm on David Montgomery's burst and it put in an NFL context. I think it'll be more average. And at the same time, when you say, and here's a good example, Scott, of how like I can be right and you can be right. They could come out at the beginning of the year and have, 10, 12 touches of Davis and 10, 12 touches of Montgomery and 10, 12 touches of Cohen and mix it up, and it works and it's great. And then one game, whenever Mike Davis gets a concussion or Tariq Cohen tweaks something, they put David Montgomery on the field for more snaps, and he pops, and he translates better than I'm picturing, and then they can't turn back. So they indeed did not intend on using David Montgomery on as a bell cow, but Montgomery shows them that he can be one anyway. And then, so this is the ebb and flow of fantasy football. But I, from a best ball perspective, like the investment of Mike Davis. I mean, you can get him in like the 13th, 14th, 15th round. I think that's going to start to adjust as people are going to see, especially from a best ball perspective, that all three of these backs can get fed. And it will be more of a level value than a value where one clear player emerges as the most valuable. But I think this whole conversation that we have, Scott, about this, more than are you right or are you wrong? Who did you take? Who did you back? Is just to understand the way the confluence of these factors can explain what's happening from initially, and then help guide us to interpret what we see as things develop. Now, what about, I want to pivot, and feel free to say anything else you want to say on this.
Yeah, just real quick, the Hunt connection was the shared Iowa State offensive coordinator Tom Manning coached both of them. Mike Davis, in a recent article, they asked him how he expects his usage to go. And he's like, definitely more touches than Seattle. So he had 150 touches last season. So if that's anywhere near being true, I definitely wasted the Montgomery pick. But just one final thought was my reasoning was, imagine you go out to the store, you buy 2 fishing lures. One is $150. The other is $20. Which one are you going to end up using more? Your first 5 weeks of fishing is probably going to be the more expensive one, which was my reason with Montgomery. But no, it seems like, smart coaching, they're going to let it be a true competition.
And some of it, this is just that Davis is good. I think if you look at Davis as a sophomore at South Carolina, you see the kind of tape that gets us really excited about a prospect running back. And Davis is, well into the prime of his career now, so it isn't as relevant. But his year before he came into the draft wasn't as good, and it was kind of confusing, and he got cut. But what's funny is in a parallel here, Scott, is that who did he deny touches last year in Seattle? Rashad Penny, who at this time last year, people were adamant, based on what you're saying, the draft investment for Penny means he's going to start. And it may end up being an exception. We may look back at Penny as one of those great exceptions, but I think that we can get into, I talk a lot about assumption of rational coaching, and I usually bring it up, Scott, when we're angry, because we all agree that rational coaching dictates you use players in a certain way, and coaches won't do, like David Johnson last year, running up the middle. But we should highlight rational coaching. But perhaps rational coaching, for the most part, Scott, is not our friend as fantasy players. Like, rational coaching is probably going to frustrate us more than it's going to help us, except when we find those inefficiencies because players have been misused in the past, and now they've landed somewhere where they're going to be used in a better way. But pivoting within that Chicago offense, what about Allen Robinson? Because before he got hurt with Blake freaking Bortles, let's keep that in mind. He was a tremendous fantasy asset, like a first round fantasy asset. There were flashes of that Allen Robinson last year, but not a lot. Mitchell Trubisky's better than Blake Bortles. I see people tossing that comparison out occasionally. They'll hint at it. He's better than Blake Bortles, people. I'm not sure how good he'll be. It's still a work in progress, but he has great coaches around him and a great offensive line coach, great offensive line, a ton of weapons. Is Allen Robinson, I mean, I'm seeing him like in the 5th round, Scott. Is that something we're going to look back on as foolish or maybe too optimistic with this plethora of weapons in this offense?
So I've been a big Allen Robinson hater ever since his 2015 breakout season, but this is finally the year I'm hopping on board. His ADP is way too low. I think what he did last year is a baseline expectation for his absolute floor. I love Anthony Miller too. He's another one of my guys, but a year fully healthy in this offense is going to do him a lot of good. And same for Anthony Miller, who his shoulder kept popping out of its socket like multiple times per game. So I like both of those guys. I don't like Mitch Trubisky. He was PFF's 33rd of 38 graded quarterbacks last year. That's terrible. That it was pretty much just the rookies beneath him in terms of passing grade. I trust the offense. I trust the coaches. And I think he'll take a step forward. And I think the wide receivers should as well.
It's going to be a fun offense. But you even mentioned Taylor Gabriel. I think maybe if there's an odd man out, a musical chairs situation, too many mouths to feed, it might be Trey Burton. And his production kind of dropped off. I mean, there's just so many other places I'm going to go. If I'm going to take a tight end in that tight end 10 to 15 range, I mean, the answer is Dallas Goedert. But also, it could be Mark Andrews. It could be Jack Doyle. I don't think it's going to be Burton. But they have, and Javon Wims is developing. We'll see what they do with Riley Ridley and the Georgia receivers. So many weapons. We'll see if Trubisky takes a step forward. It's funny, though, Scott. You wonder if it's going to be a hot take in a year or two to say the Bears going to the playoffs every year and winning, but they could improve at quarterback to get even more. Kind of like whenever Colin Kaepernick took over for Alex Smith in San Francisco. Oh, so many things to talk about. So many compelling topics. I want to veer off to a topic really quickly. That is in the news today, Scott, and it's not just Jason LaCanfora. It also Ben Standig has said that he's heard this. So this is not something that is out of the it's LaCanfora, so I'll take it with a grain of salt. That Trent Williams wants out of Washington, and we've seen so many players with their injury situations go south there. And I swear Dr. Gene said something like his kneecap could move around in his knee or something like that. Don't quote me and don't quote Dr. Gene on that. But it was gruesome, horrific, Scott, at one point what Trent Williams was playing with. So the report is that he wants out. And then immediately your mind goes to, well, where could he end up? Cleveland, of course, New England, every time, New England. I thought Arizona, but Blake Murphy set me straight that they don't really, they have the money tied up in DJ Humphries, and that's not really possible. Houston, obviously, how much would that help Deshaun Watson and Keke Coutee? But really, how much do we leave, or have we already left Washington's offense for dead when it comes to fantasy football this year?
Yeah, so it's absolutely gross. It's not exciting. I also want to say I wouldn't blame Trent Williams if this is the case. Colt McCoy, same thing, rushed him back. Now he's, has he even returned to practice yet? Williams, as far as who he is, he was a near elite or elite offensive lineman for 6 years. Last year, however, he was, just about mediocre. Maybe that's injuries. I don't know. The offense in its entirety, I want to play Darius Geis in games Washington is projected to win. I don't see there being too many of those. He's a very game script sensitive running back. But outside of that, Paul Richardson in the last round. But Yeah, I have no real interest in this offense.
Yeah, the best ball last round pick. Oh, that's still John Ross for me in drafts right
Oh,
now.
that's a great one. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm getting more and more. I was talking to Matt Waldman today on the phone, and I'm just getting more and more optimistic about Cincinnati the more I think about it, which is weird. It's weird to say. I mean, but I think actually that things are going to work out there. I want to go back, circle around to the Love Fest again. And of course, here with Scott Barrett, PFF. Always excellent to have him on the show. I like the wild turkey mirror behind you, by the way. Is it a mirror or is it just like a parchment?
No, it's a mirror.
Yeah, it's fantastic. You know, it takes me back, Scott, to in Bentleyville, Pennsylvania, where I spent a lot of my childhood in the carnival, the volunteer fire department carnival, where they raise money, and we'd throw the darts at the balloons as kids to win these mirrors that have like band names and things on them. Get a little older, you come to realize what those mirrors were for. A few of them had hints at that, but now I'm really going off the tracks. So. But to have that exhilaration to watch Josh Jacobs land in that perfect spot, the third round is tough this year in fantasy drafts. But I'll say this: it's a running back round, unless like a Keenan Allen or someone squirts through to the third round and you get a wide receiver one in the third round. That's always worth it. And I could justify Julian Edelman if you start without a wide receiver in your first two picks, like Kelce running back, Kelce Gurley or something, and then Edelman I think is undervalued. But there's a lot of running backs in the third round, Scott, that are compelling. You know, Devontae Freeman, Aaron Jones, Derrick Henry, Kerryon Johnson. You can make cases for any of these guys as the guy to target in the third round. And Gurley, for that matter, as he falls to the third round. But I've got stars in my eyes when I think about Josh Jacobs in Oakland. Are you willing to join me?
Yeah, so absolutely. I'm probably way too high on him right now. Just if you compare my rankings to his ADP, and remember, like I said, I went back and I watched the post-draft press conferences after every draft pick, and unlike David Montgomery, Miles Sanders, there's no question about what kind of workload Josh Jacobs is going to see. They were asked. John Gruden was asked, can he be a featured back? Can he handle a heavier workload than what he saw in college? Gruden said, my expectation for him, if you're listening, Josh, I encourage you to get some rest because we're going to run you a lot. We're going to give you a great opportunity. Said multiple times, they see him as a focal point of the offense. So he's going to see a massive bell cow workload, which is, exactly what you want in PPR leagues. Remember, targets are worth 2.74 times as much as an average carry. It makes you're not going to be game script sensitive, so you're an every week starter. I feel really good about him.
It's going to be fun, and Oakland's offense will be better. And they lost Kelechi Osemele, but they got Antonio Brown and Tyrell Williams. The offense is going to be better. And yeah, Josh Jacobs, why I get carried away. And the thing is, Aaron Jones, man, I mean, Aaron Jones, outside zone, a revived spirit of the offense in Green Bay, that could be beautiful. I mean, Kerryon Johnson looked like he was ready to be a bull in a china shop last year. And we know that Detroit's going to run the ball a billion times. And Derrick Henry, like maybe they're going to let him run the ball a billion times this year. There's so many compelling. Devontae Freeman, we know what he can do. He can be at that top 5, top 6 guy. There's no obstacle for him. But Josh Jacobs, I believe, is going to get the kind of usage that at least opens the door to a top 5 running back season. It's up to him to walk through it. But he's going to be used detached from the formation. He's a tremendous pass catching receiver. Pass catching running back, a route runner, all this stuff. And we can take, coaches lie. I love how many times, Scott, you've cited what a coach has said. And it's not that it's definitive proof. It just frames when we're projecting the range of outcomes for these players. That if John Gruden says, we're going to run them to death, then probably that's what they plan on doing. And doesn't that just match what you think Gruden would do anyway? When we were discussing things we were going to talk about, you brought up James Williams. And I suppose another player that is in that third round mix, although maybe with Eric Bieniemy's comments, he's going to stick in the second round now, is Damian Williams. But then there's Darrell Williams, and now there's a third Williams. There's James Williams. But really, we're back to Kansas City for the third time in the show, Scott, but they're that important. You bring up James Williams, I think, and we both have some affinity for him from a fantasy perspective and also just from watching him play. But how does James Williams or Darwin Thompson or Carlos Hyde or just your grasp of the Kansas City running back situation affect your willingness to take Damian Williams at his ADP?
Yeah, so I'll just start off by saying I think no one drafts running backs better than Andy Reid. Kareem Hunt, coming out of college, was my favorite running back prospect ever. Two of my favorite late round rookie draft sleepers were Darwin Thompson and James Williams. And, they landed Thompson in the draft. They got Williams as a undrafted free agent. I just want to say really quickly on James Williams that he blew apart my models for missed tackles forced, which might be my favorite metric. Just ridiculous in terms of forcing and generating missed tackles, both as a runner and as a receiver. The best ever in PFF college history, which has been around since 2014. So really ridiculous there, as well as some other numbers. So I do think he's really underrated. But no, Damian Williams is a guy I'm drafting who has legitimate top 5 upside, league-winning potential. I think worst case scenario, he's going to put up at least mid-range RB2 numbers. In which case, he's a streaming value at current ADP. You have to factor in Andy Reid's history with the running back position in 12 the last 15 seasons. Andy Reid's RB1 has finished top 8 among running backs in fantasy points per game. That is ridiculous. It's a number unrivaled by any other head coach or play caller, and it's not even close. Typically, Andy Reid gives these guys a bell cow workload, which is what you want to see. And we saw, I think, enough from Damian Williams last year to be optimistic. He put up great numbers, hyper efficient, especially as a pass catcher. And this team, with their bad defense, with their future Hall of Fame quarterback, what are they going to do? They're going to pass a lot, setting up really nicely for Damian Williams. And what have we heard from the coaches, the GMs, all off season this year is that Damian Williams is our starter, and I'm buying into it. And I'm drafting him highly.
Yeah, so like mid-second.
Yeah.
I mean, I have this hesitation on Damian Williams simply because, the second round price, because then you're talking about the players that you're passing on.
I have him 21 overall.
Yeah, well, and 21 overall is probably close to the break point, where you're gonna be considering him. He's gonna be there, but when I think about there's a lot of wide receivers. The thing is, in the second round this year, in the mid-second, you might see a Julio Jones or Odell Beckham or Michael Thomas leak through to you there. It's tough. But listen, the Kansas City backfield, and this is like superstition almost for me to say this and appeal to it at all, has really felt like this wheel that keeps on turning. It just one after another things happen. And Carlos Hyde, although I'm cooling more on Hyde, I like Darwin Thompson. I guess I just wonder if the situation is so good that if Damian Williams leaves the door open the same way that Spencer Ware did last year, because remember, it was Spencer Ware at first last year. And if Spencer Ware was running well, by the way, when he was playing last year before he got dinged, it would have been more of a split. And you mentioned the Kareem Hunt usage, which I think was excellent too. But still, if Charkandrick West was trusted on passing downs, it's going to be interesting to see how Reid does this. But absolutely, the Kansas City running back situation and what Damian Williams did with it easily could get first round value and make him look like a profitable pick in the second round. So these are some of the big decisions we have in drafts. But tell me why you liked James Williams and why you mentioned James Williams, undrafted free agent. But as I've said earlier, Scott, that nobody would have blinked if James Williams went in the 4th round of the draft based on his resume. And if instead of drafting Darwin Thompson in the 6th, they had drafted James Williams in the 4th, then we all would have said, well, watch out, Damian Williams. And if James Williams plays like that player that we thought deserved to go in the mid rounds of the draft, then draft capital as much as we talked about appealing to it in some situations. And there definitely are decision makers out there who will make decisions to make their previous decisions look better, or at least in an attempt to. Andy Reid doesn't strike me that way. James Williams is a good running back. Why did you mention him to me?
So among all Power 5 running backs with at least 200 NCAA touches in the PFF college era that's since 2014, James Williams ranks first in career missed tackles forced per touch. He's followed by David Montgomery, who I also love, and then Alvin Kamara. And then on that top 10 list, you have Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon, Saquon Barkley, Chris Carson, TJ Yeldon, and the list just kind of goes on with a lot of the NFL's best running backs, or running backs who at least made it to the NFL. So we know this is a good stat. We also know that receiving, it's easier to force a missed tackle as a pass catcher than as a runner. But even if you adjust for that, James Williams still comes out ahead as arguably the most elusive running back we've charted in a while. Also underrated as a runner. We have a metric that measures how easy it is for a running back to go down on first contact. And of 369 qualifying running backs since 2014, Williams is actually the best. Now, there's these stats can be kind of noisy. I did, from watching the tape, notice that he doesn't really just burst through a hole. He kind of looks for contact. So that plays a role into it, as well as, the scheme. There's a lot of space for him. Still, just, these numbers, even adjusting for that, just show someone who's, really special. And Williams is a guy I typically avoid undrafted free agents, but he's an undrafted free agent I love, as is Greg Dortch, and to a slightly lesser extent, Emmanuel Hall.
Yeah, Dortch there's a lot of people who liked him. I think Brian's still 5 among others, and he's a dynamo, undrafted, and with the Jets. But there's also a chance for him to latch on there. Emmanuel Hall had second, third round. I think Lance Zierlein even said he had second, third round tape, but a combination of injuries and maybe attitude about coming back from injuries or something like that. Don't quote me on that. We're in like the last 10 minutes of the show, Scott. So, and it makes me think, by the way, when we talk about all these undrafted free agents, I think Evan Silva and preseason DFS. Yes. But also we're degenerates. Also, that it's exciting to think about the preseason games. Now that it's summertime, preseason games, it's hurricane season, but also preseason games are right around the corner. And beach trips, I'll be taking one in early July. You're the Jersey guy that you are, all about the Jersey Shore. But what are you excited about? Are you a fan of a team? I don't know why I don't know this, Scott. Are you a fan? Are you a faithful of any specific team?
Yeah, I've been going to Giants games and have had season tickets since I was 2 years old. But they also stink, and I think they're doing really dumb things. So I like the past few years, I just I recommend these guys, and then I root for the guys I recommend. So it's easier that way.
Yeah. So wow. So that would mean that you were born into it. So you were born into your Giants fandom, yes?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And this is coming off of what, like the '86 Super Bowl? You weren't born yet.
No.
But then I guess you experienced the Kerry Collins Super Bowl when you were a kid.
Yeah, I cried that day. I was like 10 years old, I think.
Yeah, and then of course you have the Eli years, but as we can see publicly, much like Peyton, it was like the game that they honored Peyton at halftime. I think it was against Kansas City. That was really, he did win a Super Bowl later that year, but it was like we saw a public death scene. And I almost feel like these videos coming out of OTAs with Eli are similar. And I'm here in New Orleans, and the Mannings live right down the street, so I may have to see them around. So I love you, Mannings. But I understand now why my brain blocked out you as a Giants fan. But do you want to expound on that? And I wanted you to talk as Scott Barrett, the lifelong Giants fan that was born into it, not Scott Barrett the analyst. Although if you lapse into Scott Barrett the analyst, that's okay. What do you think watching your Giants?
Yeah, so I'll say the best team you could be a fan of over the past 15, 20 years, is the Patriots. And then after that, it's the Giants. And I think that's also how the NFL from 2000 to 2020 is going to be remembered. It's going to be remembered as, holy crap, this Patriots, Bill Belichick, Tom Brady dynasty was one of the most impressive things we've ever seen in the history of sport. So it's going to be Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, and then the two quarterbacks who beat them. It's going to be Eli Manning and two, miraculous Super Bowls no one saw coming. And then the same thing again with a backup quarterback, Nick Foles, who expected him to win the Super Bowl. So I think the biggest storylines, 30 years from now, anyone's going to remember from these 2 decades is Brady and then Eli and Foles. So yeah, I think it's been a really bizarre, fun fandom where it's just like, oh, we suck. Oh, there's no way we win this. Oh my God, what? How did we win? And then we did that twice. So that's been a lot of fun, like no expectations, and then boom, Super Bowl.
Yeah, I think the Steelers and the Giants both won Super Bowls in years that they started off as road wildcard teams and won the Super Bowl, right? It was down in Tampa Bay, right? The Giants won the wild card game in Tampa Bay, and then it was, they were off. And in summertime, did you live close enough to the Jersey Shore? Did you spend time on the Jersey Shore? Is that part of your DNA?
Not really. No. But I've done it.
Jersey is, you could divide up Jersey like many other states into like 3 or 4 sub-states and cultures, and depending on what part of Jersey you're from. I'm just flashing back to my Syracuse days, but you're about to become a Texan.
That's right. Yeah.
Which is going to be a whole other thing. And again, you're going to join us down here around the Gulf Coast in our water anxiety, which really leads back into Scott. And this is where, because it's the last few minutes, I feel like I can go off the rails and then like pull the plug right after I do it. People are like, what just happened? It's climate change anxiety. Like 2019, as everyone's watching Chernobyl. Have you been watching Chernobyl?
No, I
have you heard about it?
Yeah.
I haven't watched it yet either. The people, and of course, when I say I love, what I mean is I'm really invigorated by disaster and chaos. And, there's something about watching it all. Of course, now that I'm here in New Orleans, it can make it a lot more personal and close and really take the edge, that sort of voyeur edge off of it. And I think people that will watch Chernobyl. So, it's anxiety, but it's also summertime, and it is time to relax. I guess I can turn that. I don't even know how to turn that over to you gracefully, Scott, and just say, give me pull something. You're on the couch now, so we're really totally in the void. Just pull something out of the air for me. Rescue me here, Scott.
Yeah, I haven't studied climate change at all. I don't really know enough to have an articulate response, but I will say, I know people are saying, we're supposed to all die by 2050 or 2020, whatever. I will say, if someone gives you odds, bet the over on that. Not that it's a necessary to happen, but I just think that's a good bet for you, because otherwise you're just dead and it doesn't matter.
Exactly. It's like Pascal's wager, right? I mean, it's like, look at the payoff, and there's nothing to lose if you bet against it. But it's great, man. And it's great. I guess since I'm looking, and I actually still have you for another minute or two, I can ask. So we can go inside the mind of Scott Barrett, like James Seltzer does whenever I'm on his show every week, inside the mind of Sigmund Bloom. So I'm assuming you did not set out to be a fantasy football analyst, and most of us. I don't think anybody in the fantasy football industry set out to be a fantasy football analyst. True?
So you're kind of wrong, and I have a good quick story for you. I don't know if you're going to cut me off, but I remember being in high school on my lunch break, setting my fantasy baseball team lineups, reading Brad Evans, Andy Behrens, and just being like, that is the coolest job in the world. I would love to one day be able to just, write about fantasy and do fantasy all day. That sounds amazing. Working from home in my underwear on the computer. And then right out of college, I was a philosophy poli-sci double major at 2 of the best schools for philosophy poli-sci. And came out, was working some 9-to-5 job. I hated in a cubicle. The only good thing about it was you got to listen to podcasts, your headphones while you were working. And I was a big baseball guy for the longest time. I found your podcast. I listened to it in the cubicle every single day for that entire summer. And it like got me through the summer. And I had the sickest teams of all time. You guys were all over Josh Gordon. You were all over Julius Thomas, Peyton Manning, Manuel Sanders. So like my teams were just nuts because of you guys. But yeah, you got me through the year. And then you had JJ Zacharyson on. He was like, hey, we need writers. So I applied to write. I got the gig. And, I'm still at this job. I'm daydreaming about what it would be like 5 years from now to be on the show with you. Eventually quit that job, keep writing, work, 18-hour days working in my day job, writing, and then eventually turn it into a full-time job, and eventually on the couch with you, literally living the dream.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. And that's great. And that's great for me to think, I guess I'm old because I've been doing this long enough that because I feel like I've known you, like we've kicked it around forever. So to think that, no, actually fantasy sports were prominent enough as you were coming up to high school for you to picture it as a real job. Because when I decided to try to make it my job, there weren't that many people. I mean, it's kind of laughable to think it would be a real job. And now it is very much a real job. Real fantasy. We're getting into some things. And I understand now why you chuckled at Pascal's wager if you were majoring philosophy and poli-sci. I was philosophy and policy studies. But I went to Syracuse for broadcast journalism because I really just wanted to listen to myself talk all day and be the play-by-play announcer for the Pirates. And then the Newhouse School in broadcast journalism, let's just say, wasn't the place that I thought I belonged. I belonged at the Fish Show, and I belong in New Orleans, and I belong on the couch with Scott Barrett, PFF at Scott Barrett, 2 R's, 2 T's, DFB, Dude Fantasy Bro, and it's so comfortable, man. I feel like this is just the couch conversation that we'll pick up later this year, and we'll pick up later this year, and then next year. It's great to have Scott as part of our community, a part of this community out there. Scott, speaking of Scott Fish Bowl 9 invitations going out. That's a summertime ritual that is fun. Everybody putting their heart and soul into this community, making it a great place to be, a place that Scott Barrett would dream about in high school being part of. A place that I feel very lucky to be part of every day. Thank you, everybody, for giving us this opportunity to serve you. It is our pleasure always because you are so classy.